Good morning, everybody. Running a little bit behind this morning. I'm Melissa Nielsen with Waldorf Essentials. Hope you are having a wonderful start of your week so far. So today we're going to talk about the devil of comparison, or the dangers of comparison. And that's such a hard topic sometimes. I think that it's human nature for us to compare ourselves to somebody else, to compare our progress to somebody else's progress, to compare our children to, I have 5 children. It's easy for me to go, well, number 3 doesn't act the same as number 1, and that kind of thing. And so I think that it's important to distinguish the difference between comparing for comparison's sake and comparing for a more direct or derogatory or to be feeling bad sake. So let's talk about the difference between the two. So I might say my oldest has ASD. So I might say, well, Jacob, who's my second child, doesn't act at all the way Harry did. So that's like a comparison that's not a horrible comparison. Now, if I were to say, gosh, he's just not as smart as Harry was at that age, that's a more derogatory comparison, or a comparison that's not looking at each child individually. I think it's very important when we look at our children and we try to compare what it is that they're doing, that we compare apples to apples and not pineapples to apples. Pineapple sounds like apple, but it's much different from an apple. So I think it's really important that we're comparing the right things. So I might say, that's a more healthy way to say, their behavior is sure different. Then I'm comparing the behavior of the 2 children, but then I have to take the next bit into account, and that is that they have completely different temperaments. So I think it's really important when we're looking at, especially when we're looking at our children, to take all of those factors into account, and then I would compare further and say, well, this child has autism spectrum disorder and this one doesn't. So it really is important to be able to look at the full spectrum when it comes to looking at our children. I think that evaluation is a huge piece of sort of what we're doing as homeschoolers, if you're homeschooling, and even I think if you're not homeschooling and you are just seeking to live a more natural and connected life with your children, I think that looking at your children from an evaluation standpoint on a regular basis is a good idea. And I think then when you do that, it is important to know the difference between, comparing against a benchmark and evaluating against a benchmark. So, and a benchmark might be, all 3-year-olds should be able to dress themselves. That might be a benchmark. And all of us have seen that, when it comes to the pediatrician's office, or what people think that a 3-year-old should be able to do. Well, then if maybe your 3-year-old isn't, then you have to step back and look at, maybe why? Why wouldn't that? Is it because I've not given them the opportunity to do that? Is it because they have some physical or mental struggle that is keeping them from doing that? Rather than going to the place of worry, self-doubt, and all of those things, look at the bigger evaluation picture. And I would say that should go with as they grow for sure. So, I might go, I'm thinking right now about my son Samuel, who is 11 and a half and smart as a whip, but phlegmatic to the core. So I might think to myself, gosh, when Ellie was 11 and a half, her work was so much neater. And instead of comparing him in a negative way or evaluating him in a negative way, I might look at his work and at his schoolwork and go, I think I would really like to work with him on neatness. And that's a strength in comparison. So I would also go, he's really good at this recall piece. He's really good at being able to retell a story. He's really good at the writing piece, but his neatness could sure use some work. So that's an evaluation, and it then also gives me a place to jump from. It gives me this is where he is now. Where would I like to see him in a week, a month? By the beginning of next school year. So it allows me to sort of have that space where I'm not continually comparing him. I'm just stating what is and then evaluating where I want him to go. And then it also makes me have that responsibility of, what steps have to be in place. So when we compare or we do any kind of evaluation, I do think it's important that as parents we remember that we have this stewardship and that we take that on very important, take on that very important role very seriously. And so we have to then not just say, well, this is what's happening. We have to be an active part in getting to the next space. So we have to really look at that. And I think that goes for homeschooling, non-homeschooling. If we're talking just about behavior, we're not talking about academics, all of those things. As parents, we have this stewardship and we have such a huge role in what they're doing and in how they are accomplishing what they're accomplishing. So it's definitely about us stepping back and looking at how can we together, how can I facilitate this movement to this goal place that we'd like to be. So that would be like if we're comparing children. If we are comparing experiences, it's also really important to compare experiences fairly. There's a lot of for my homeschooler watchers, there's a lot of comparing the Waldorf model at home to the Waldorf model in the school. That is a really, really dangerous comparison because it is very different, very different. Now, there are definitely those elements that are the same. There are those elements that are the same. We have made lessons and we might have circle time and we're using the Waldorf laid out curriculum and we might be using the elements that they're using in the school, but it looks very, very different. And so when moms say to me, oh, I went and visited the school, and then they come home and they try to emulate the school, I would never say do that. I would say definitely you want to look at what's going on there and what the parts that you want to emulate are how prepared the teacher probably is, how much that the subjects live within them, how how much artwork is going on. And then you also have to step back when I say artwork, and you have to step back and you have to go, oh, but they've been a teacher for 14 years. I've been doing this for 14 days. So you have to look at the whole picture and go, well, I can't compare my block crayon drawing to this teacher's block crayon drawing who's been drawing for 14 years and I've been drawing for 14 days. You might be able to say, wow, I'd really like to get to this place. But rather than feeling badly about it, you have to go, this is a jumping off point here. And then I can work myself up to this place here and really be able to then have measurable goals. So what would your first goal be? Well, the very first goal would probably be to hop on over to Teach Wonderment and buy the block crayon DVDs, or be one of our Thinking, Feeling, Willing Plus members and have that block crayon drawing streaming video set. So that might be your first step. And your second step then would have to be, obviously, making the time to practice. So when are you going to do that? So maybe you're working on, what am I going to do when I get up before my children? Well, that's a perfect thing to do when you get up before your children. So then you're sort of making steps for yourself to get to this goal. And that's where evaluation can be, in comparison, can be a good, healthy thing. When it comes to a bad place is when we go, man, I'm never going to be that good. I am never going to be as good as that teacher. So you want to be really careful. The other thing that I see often is, and I see this in co-ops that I talk to, I see it in my own co-op, where people say, well, in the school they would be. Now, that sentence in and of itself is a fine sentence. In the school they would be doing X. And I say that all the time. I say, in the school they might be doing this right now for 5th grade. But we have to accommodate all the ages for all the children here. So this is how we're going to approach it. We're going to make sure that our kids that are in 5th grade here at home and in our co-op are approaching it like this. But we're going to pare that down and make it a little more age appropriate for the rest of the children. So I think it's important to be able to look at a comparison and find the positive and find how it can work rather than giving up and just deciding that it can't work. I think that when it comes to comparing our partners to another partner, that's a huge no-no. I think it's very important to look at what's going on. Temperament is huge. And if you're not really fluid with temperament yet, I cannot recommend more. It's like I cannot recommend it enough that you go ahead and you get busy on finding out your temperament. A lot of people will say to me, oh, well, yeah, I don't know. But then they start with all their struggles. And I go, but let's back up. Talk to me about what temperament Dad is. Don't talk to me about about the struggles first, which often when they start telling me about the struggles, then I can say, is Dad this? Because I can hear it or feel it, and knowing what Mom is, then will often inform for me based on her description as to what Dad is. And a lot of that is a melancholy will describe a choleric a lot differently than another choleric would, or than a sanguine would, and vice versa. A choleric is going to describe a melancholy a lot differently than, say, another melancholy, or a phlegmatic would. So it's important to sort of keep those things in mind when we're thinking about temperament. And when we're comparing to one another, it's very important to keep them centered on what's positive and what's true, rather than what might be exposition, or what might be us trying to put a excuse me, a label on something. So it's very important to sort of keep those things in mind when we're comparing, talking about other friends, or especially our partners, and really looking at the big picture. The big picture is always, let's look at temperament first, and then temperament informs all of those other things. Temperament informs how somebody acts. Temperament informs how they react. Temperament informs how they parent. Temperament informs how they relax. Temperament informs so much, and so we really have to be able to look at that before we start to compare. So when people say to me, you and Eric have an amazing marriage, how do I get there? My marriage might be in the dumps, and that, and then they might say that to us. And the first thing we say is, we have been working at this every single day since the day we got together. Every single day. We have not had a day of, screw it, I'm just not going to work on it today. We have worked every single day. So that means every single day we have shown up for each other. Every single day. So unless you are willing to be able to say that every single day you've shown up for one another, that's the first thing right there. But you can start that today. You can decide today, honey, today, every day, we're going to show up for one another. That means that there's a lot of times when I see that he's struggling with something, or he sees that I'm struggling with something, and then what each one of us is personally struggling with might take a back seat because we're helping the other person. That's part of stepping forward and having that loving care for one another that needs to be there in order to show up for one another. That doesn't mean that I am not taking care of my own needs, but that means that there are times when his needs might be way more outweighing mine. And that's not every day, of course, because sometimes it's the other way around, and my needs outweigh him. That's what it means to show up and be present for each other every day. And that happens when you are at home together. That happens when one parent goes to work. I think it's especially important when one or both parents are working, that you decide every single day that you're going to show up together, that you're going to show up and sort of be in that space. That keeps you from looking at people in the public eye or other people that you see and go, wow, I wish my marriage was like that, or I wish my partnership was like that. You don't want to do that. That is an unfair comparison. You don't know what those other people are going through. You don't know the struggles that they might have, and you don't know their background. I think that that's really important. I think one of the things that really informs how my husband and I show up for one another is that I did have a first marriage, and I came from a home where my parents were divorced, and so it took me a while to figure out, hey, I don't want that. It wasn't enough for me to grow up in that. It took me getting older, getting healthy, realizing I didn't want to be part of that anymore, and that I wanted to create something better for my life and for then my children. And so in order to do that, I had to be healthy myself. So I couldn't compare myself to, and I did often in my head as I was trying to get healthy. I had this dear friend, and I talked about her a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Chris, and I just love her dearly. And she was my bestie when we lived in Idaho Falls together. And she's still in many ways my bestie. I talk to her almost every day. And she had this marriage that was amazing. I could see on the outside it was amazing. So when she would say, "Oh, I'm struggling with her husband," I'd be like, "What? You struggle?" And so she would have to. There were times when I said to her, "You guys are like my gold standard," and I would say that to both of them because I love them both dearly, her and her husband, and they would both say to me, "Well, back up the truck. This is why." We have what we have. And it is because they show up for each other every day. And they have 8 children. And they show up for each other every day. And so it was this huge eye-opener for me. And at the time, when I was really starting to do that comparison, I was going through a divorce and I was not feeling very good with myself. And I was trying to figure out, how do I get to this when I'm all the way over here? And so instead of feeling badly about that comparison, I used that as a goal. That was like my benchmark for the awesome marriage, was this place over here. So I knew I had steps, and those steps had to begin with me. They had to begin with how I was presenting every day. And then they had to begin also with me finding somebody who was also willing to do that. And what's funny about that is I think that the Spirit finds you people when you are in the right place in your life. So I had to be in the right place in order for Eric to show up. And he and I had to both be in this equally yoked space in order for us to come together and be able to be equally yoked. So it took a lot of time and effort. So if you are in a partnership now where you're thinking, man, we were not equally yoked when we got together. We are certainly not that way now, but I really want to be there. So it takes you both deciding. We're not going to compare ourselves to a lot of other people, but we will say that we have these friends and they seem like they get along really well. So we're going to ask them, what is it that you do? And I've told you what Eric and I do, but if you are in that place, definitely ask. If you have friends that seem like they have it all together, ask them. Say, what do you guys do that helps you stay on the same page? I think it's really important. I think it's a very good thing that you can ask people. And then you have to sort of step back and go, all right, well, that's what they do. This is how we can maybe implement that. And try not to be hung up on everything that they do. Definitely you want to turn it back to yourself and how can you take care of it yourself. So I hope that is helpful. I think that when we seek to compare, we have to make sure, it doesn't matter what it is. Like I said, friendships, other people, it's definitely important as you're older and you are, and I'm being like adult, grown up, that when you are frustrated at somebody else, and you know, I have to tell you, there are people that frustrate me every day, and that are in my life, and I have to step back and go, all right, taking a deep breath, what's their background, why might they be acting like this, and how am I going to show up for them? Because I could show up as like a snarky witch, or I could just decide, I'm going to give that some space and let them show up how they're going to show up, and I will try not to react horribly to how they're showing up. And maybe I will try to be a better example of how to show up. And I'm not always good at it. You know, like sometimes I fail miserably at it. And I go, well, that wasn't a good idea. Let's try again next time. And so I want you to be encouraged that if you do have people in your life that you're struggling with, try not to compare them to what you would do, because I do that. I go, well, who does that? Like, you know, I might look at what their actions are and go, who does that? And then I have to step back and I have to remember, okay, wait a minute, but we're two different people. We're coming at things very differently. Even if you're the same temperament, I think that's when it's the most maddening to me as a choleric, is when you're the same temperament and that person is sort of the same age or maybe older, or somewhere around there, and you know that they've had life experience and that they're subscribing to this path, and why in the heck are they still showing up this way? Well, that's not between them and me. It's between them and God. And I have to remember that on a regular basis. So if you are struggling with people in your life, absolutely take the time to remember that it's not your struggle. It's their struggle. And your only job is like how you show up. So make sure that you're showing up as the best you possible, as often as possible. And then when you're coming to the comparison place, whether it be, like I said, with partners, with friends, with your children, that you're coming at it from a healthy evaluation standpoint rather than comparing apples to pineapples, because that never works. And I want you to remember that when the next time you try to compare anything, any any kind of comparison, unless it actually is apples and apples, Johnny Gold apple, Fuji apple, unless it is apples to apples, then you need to remember just about everything is apples to pineapples. And they might sound the same, but they look very, very different. And everybody is like that. Every situation, and your children are 100% different. Even if they're twins, they're 100% different in so many ways. So you want to make sure that when you're doing any kind of comparison or evaluation, that you're coming at it from a positive place of where do we want to be, rather than the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. So you want to really remember that. And again, the same with partnerships. Do not compare your partner to somebody else's partner unless you have taken the time to look at your own part in things, how things got to where they are. You know, you didn't wake up just one day after being married for 15 years and all of a sudden have it be horrible. You were maybe a frog in a pot. That's what happened to me. I was a frog in a pot, and it got worse and worse and worse. Before I realized it, I felt like my goose was cooked or my frog was cooked. And so then it was about me getting out of that space. So, for me, getting out of that space meant that I needed a divorce. But that does not always have to be the case, for sure. If your partner is willing to work on themselves and willing to get you to a place where you are equally yoked, absolutely stick with it and work together. Like I said, I'm not an advocate of divorce. I'm an advocate of everybody feeling good and of everybody doing the right thing with their stewardship over their children. So I think that is immensely important. If you are willing to work, that is so, so important. So anyways, I think this is really what I wanted to talk about today. Just the devil of comparison, and trying to be very careful when you're comparing anything, and really being able to keep the end in mind, and really realizing that it's a great place to jump off. If you see something that's maybe amazing and it's not where you are, it's a great jumping off place, but then don't start to feel bad about it. You want to have goals that sort of get you to that place. So I hope that was helpful to some of you. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye now.